Lucy Maud Montgomery was born in New London, November 30th, 1874, on the same date actually as Winston Churchill was born in Blenheim Palace in England. And if you think of the influence that Winston Churchill had in the world, and Lucy Maud with her writings, it's quite a, that they both were born at the same time. Shortly after she was born, her mother's tuberculosis became so serious that she could no longer care for herself. So she and the baby went back to Cavendish to her parents' home to be cared for by her parents and her Aunt Emily. When Lucy Maud was about 22 months old, her mother died, leaving her in the care of her grandparents and her Aunt Emily. And her earliest memory, she says, is being held by her father and looking at her mother in the coffin and seeing her mother there. And so her father then left the island after that and went out to Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and remarried out there. And she was left in the care of her grandparents. And it was a very good upbringing in the fact that they had seen to every one of her physical needs, but she was such a sensitive child. They weren't quite the best people in the world for having raised. They were older and more set in their ways. They weren't, we'll say, the most idyllic childhood that she could have possibly had, but it was certainly a good childhood in the fact that the McNeils were renowned storytellers, and they believed in education. And her grandfather, her great-grandfather had actually been Speaker of the Legislature at one time. So they were politically connected. They were the first family in Cavendish, and she said she was eternally grateful for the fact that she was born in Cavendish beside the Gulf of St. Lawrence, because the sound of the sea had become a much of a part of her as the beating of her own heart. And from her bedroom window as a child, she could look over and see McNeil's Pond, the sand dunes, and the ocean and beyond. And the summer she was 12, the wreck of the Marco Polo happened. And that summer, there was 2 other children living in the home with the relatives that were staying there. And the captain of the ship was billeted with the Montgomery family, or the McNeil family. And when the sailors were paid off, they were paid gold coin, and all that gold was stacked in the middle of the parlor table. The children looked in the window and watched each sailor being paid off. So she had a very wonderful and active imagination, and all these stories she was told in the setting around her is what she gathered together to write the stories about in later years. And her Montgomery side of the family came from Park Corner, and her Aunt Emily, her mother's sister, had married John Campbell, her father's first cousin, and she would visit with them quite often on the other side of the Lake of Shining Waters, Campbell's Pond, in Park Corner, was across her grandfather's home. So again, when she needed a lake for the story Anne of Green Gables, she transplanted that one and to describe in the book, but people thought it was always the pond in Cavendish here, which was McNeil's Pond, and she was very clear in the fact that the description was for the one up there. But she chose the communities around Cavendish here when she wrote about it. Avonlea was Cavendish, Hunter River was Bright River, Newbridge was New Glasgow, White Sands was Rustico, the Shore Road is the road that goes from Cavendish to Rustico, Carmody, where Matthew goes to purchase the dress with puff sleeves and comes back with pitchforks and brown sugar, was actually Stanley Bridge, where the McNeil family did most of their shopping at. And so this was the world of Lucy Maud that she wrote up into the book. And in Lucy Maud's life, the McNeils were a very sort of dour Presbyterian people, and you must always behave yourself, lest the neighbors would think you were doing something wrong. Where the Montgomery side of the family believed in having a good time, but also being respectable. And so she was sort of a half and half. One side of her would like to go out and have a good time. The other side thought it was very important that you sort of maintain a very proper social image. And there was always that sort of struggle between one side trying to control the other. And she was very driven in the fact that she wanted to become an author. And so she kept journals, she wrote poetry, she would send stories away for acceptance. And the story about the wreck of the Marco Polo, which she wrote when she was 12, actually won a prize for that. And it gave her that little bit of courage and inspiration to carry on doing it. And during her lifetime, she would gather all these stories, make notes and things, and keep journals. And she made a note about a family in the community adopting a young girl, and a notation beside her, wonder if a boy had consented, if they had wanted a boy and had got a girl by mistake. And that was the germ of the story Anne of Green Gables. And what happened in that people would ask her if Anne was really a real person, and she said no with great reluctance, because once she had thought out the character and created her, she seemed to take on a life of her own, because when she put the pen to paper, the book that was actually going to be written as a 13-part serial turned into a whole book and just went on from there. And she was so thrilled when that book was finally published 100 years ago last summer. And in later years she left the island, and she said that she did one of the greatest injustices to her she ever did to herself was by leaving Prince Edward Island, where she felt most happy and content her whole life. And in later years she was only ever able to return here on vacations and that, but it certainly was the place that was the inspiration for her writings and brought her the greatest amount of happiness.